Thank you for viewing the Title II Part A informational webinar regarding consolidated monitoring. Federal law requires that districts receiving federal funds be monitored. The districts are selected based on a variety of factors. And the purpose of monitoring is really to assist your district in making sure the funds are spent in the best possible way. It's an opportunity for you to evaluate what you're doing well, and also an opportunity to look at some things that might need some improvement. The areas of review for Title II Part A consist of teacher certification, your Title II program development, implementation, how it's evaluated, equitable services for non-public schools, financial management, and then program design at the school level. You will or have already received a link to a SharePoint folder for your district, and it will look something like this. It will have a folder for each program that is being evaluated. For our purposes, we're going to ask that you upload things into the Title II Part A library. And within that library, there will be separate folders that align with the areas of review. Also in your folder will be the self-assessment tool, which I'm going to explain in just a minute, that we hope you'll use to guide your thinking through the process, and also as a checklist to ensure that you are looking at each section in detail. Also in this library will be a copy of this video in case you need to refer back to it at any time. We do ask that you upload documents in the appropriate folders, and also that you label them according to their content. So for example, if this was the teacher certification folder, this could be some names of the documents. This will help you stay more organized, and in case there's any discussion or questions, you'll know exactly what document we're talking about. And it also enables us to match the documentation up with the area of review. The self-assessment tool looks like this, and it is very similar to the document we use in terms of the monitoring. Again, this can be a useful tool to you, and there are some parts on here that we're going to ask you to respond directly on the document. The first section talks about teacher certification, and throughout this webinar or in the PowerPoint, there will be some notes on the side, just like here, that just maybe better explains the area of review. So for teacher certification, we are looking to make sure that your district ensures that everyone is properly certified, and if they're not, how you are supporting those teachers that are not. That parents have been notified of their rights to request information about their child's teacher, and that if any classes are being taught by a non-certified staff member for 4 or more consecutive weeks, that parents of those students are notified as well. A certified teacher in this situation can mean different things. It may be someone with an emergency certificate. It may be someone who does have a valid certificate, but they're teaching out of their content, or it may be a long-term substitute. But just we want to ensure, if that's the case, that the families of those students have been notified. Also, I'd like to mention that in each section, there's going to be examples of suggested documentation, and please keep in mind that's a suggestion only. We want you to feel free to provide the documentation that you feel best represents your program. So for program development, implementation, and evaluation, there are 5 sections. And in this section, we do ask that you fill in just a little bit under the narrative title, or under the narrative section, excuse me. And please feel free to keep this brief. This is a Word document, so you can type directly on it, or if you would feel more comfortable printing it and handwriting it, whatever you prefer is fine. But we would like just a brief statement or two on a description of how these items are being addressed. So this section talks about how new teachers are supported in the district, how seasoned teachers are supported and for their growth and development, how schools are prioritized based on need, and how all shareholders are included in the decision making, and that you are evaluating your plan for effectiveness. The rest of this is about recruitment and retention, what your district does to support those areas, and that documentation be provided for any district personnel that are paid out of Title II Part A funds in terms of the assignments they're assigned to. So this would be most likely coaches if Title II funds are used for them, some type of lesson plan or just some type of documentation that shows that how they are working in the schools or with staff that aligns to your approved application. The equitable service section is very similar across programs, and this is only going to be for those of you that do have participating non-public schools. If you do not, you'll just check no and leave this section blank. If you do have participating schools, this just goes over that they have had their consultation, that you as the district are overseeing the activities and making sure that they are aligned with Title II Part A intent, and that the administrators in the non-public schools are aware of their rights and any complaint procedures that may occur. The financial management section is about just making sure that Title II funds are spent on what is in your approved GMAP plan and budget. One of the main things we look for here is an alignment between the budget and the MUNIS report. So are the amounts on the budget aligned with what was budgeted in your GMAP application? And also, are the codes being used in both places the same? We always encourage you to work closely with your financial officer, and this is one of the things we find most often, and it usually is just a lack of communication more than anything else. So that is what we really encourage you to look at closely when you are starting and getting your documentation together. We want to make sure that anyone paid either partially or fully from Title II Part A's are keeping appropriate records, that there is a separate MUNIS report for Title II Part A expenditures, that financial audits are clear of findings, and if there were findings, that those have been addressed, that any fees that have been paid out of Title II Part A funds are for Title II Part A expenses only, that any material or equipment purchased with these funds are labeled, and what your procedure is for that if there needs to be collection or disposal, And the last two are also very important to think about, and that is that you have procedures in place in your district in terms of internal control. So that this is always another good opportunity to take a closer look at what your district has in place. And then lastly, that Title II Part A funds are used to supplement and not supplant any activities or initiatives in the district. The last section just talks about program design, most likely at the school level, and that is about professional learning. If funds are used for class size reduction staff or any other services in the district, that there is an evidence base involved and that the criteria for professional learning is met through the professional learning that is offered. That can be found in your ESSA regulations. It can also be found on your GMAP application. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to give us a call. And then the last thing is how the Title II Part A coordinator works with schools in helping them to develop or implement any Title II Part A related programs. This is a rough schedule for the monitoring process, but I just wanted to give you some information on how this will flow. You will initially get a letter sent to you via email from one lead. The Title I lead consultant will coordinate your district's monitoring, and then the leads from the other programs will work together with him or her. But so you will get that letter, and then there will be about a 4 or 5 week period where you will kind of organize the schedule. Obviously this year these were going to be virtual interviews rather than in person. So each program will let you know who needs to be interviewed based on how your funds are utilized. For Title II, we typically ask to meet with principals. If there is any staff paid with Title II Part A fund, we'll want to talk with them for a few minutes. And then any administrators from non-public schools if they participate in Title II Part A funding. But there'll be a little bit over a month to coordinate that, and then your lead will send that out to us, and then we will set up these virtual meetings. Title II, our monitoring usually never takes longer than a day, and our interviews are typically 45 minutes to an hour long. There will be 2 of us. Each district will have a Title II Part A lead, and that will be your normal consultant that you work with through the year, plus an additional consultant just to be there for additional support for notes and things like that. Once the interviews are scheduled, we will send you your consultant from Title II will send you communicate with you one way, either email or phone, to give you a timeline for the documentation uploads. We typically like to have those in the folders at least 1 week prior to the interviews. That gives us time to go over it and highlight things that we see that are really working well, and look over any other things we may have questions about. So you will get notification on that. And then we'll have the actual interviews. Again, for Title II purposes, it will not be over any longer than that. And then you can expect feedback from us approximately 8 weeks later. Typically it'll be a little sooner than that, but it won't be any longer. And then the whole consolidated monitoring report will be available to your district about 12 weeks after the interviews. These are just a few questions that we picked up along the way. And one of them is, if you don't already have it in place, implementing an organization system with your documentation and your records. So as you go through the self-assessment tool and check things off the list, it's a really good opportunity to put something in place so that you will have this documentation available and ready, not necessarily for monitoring purposes, but also for planning. So when you go into next year's planning, you have your information available. This is what we did. This was effective. This wasn't. Moving forward, this is what we need to do, and so forth. KDE went through a federal audit this spring and summer, and we found that to be a very useful lesson that we learned from it, and it really has helped us get a better handle on our plans for FY21. Again, just a reminder to please label each piece of documentation so it's identifiable to what section it represents and then what the document includes. We want to also remind you that the same documentation might be used in several different places, and please feel very comfortable with that. We don't want you to feel like you have to come up with something new for every area. Your CDIP, for example, your needs assessment, your most current MUNIS, those are documents that will probably be used in multiple places. And then the last two say basically the same thing, and that is just please feel free to communicate with your consultant as needed throughout the whole process. If you need any help with understanding some of the questions on the self-assessment document, if you have any doubts on what documentation might be appropriate, or anything at all throughout the whole process, please don't hesitate to stay in contact with your consultant or any one of us. We are very, very glad to help. So here is our contact information. If you don't have it already, again, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that might not have been covered here, and we look forward to working with you through the monitoring process.